Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I'm here to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of Fresh Parchment. So because I knew that this anniversary was coming up and because I've gained a lot of new subscribers recently, I put out a call for questions a few weeks ago and have gathered some of the responses that I've gotten and we'll try and answer these in no particular order. So here we go. I have gathered the questions here on my laptop, so I may be glancing down to read them out, but I will also try and have them up here on the screen so you all can see them too. Also, apologies if number one, you can hear some of the construction noises from across the street, or if my answers are a little bit too long. I'm never sure how much or how little detail to give. So first we have a question from Linda N, who asked me, what do you like to spend time doing with friends that is enjoyable and fun? Honestly, as I started writing my answers to this, they sounded really boring, but honestly, it's the simple things that I really enjoy doing with friends. So most importantly, I just like talking with them about books or theater or just what's going on in their lives. I love going to book sales with friends or to the theater or to the movies or crafting with them. I have embroidered with Marissa before and with my friend Veronica, who you've seen. I knit as well, so sometimes we have knit together and I'm hoping that our former coworker Mary will show Veronica and I how to crochet, and my mother. On my own as well, I also like to practice yoga and cook and bake a little bit, not nearly as much as I should. I like to, or rather I should, practice music. I often, again, don't as much as I should. And I also love doing puzzles, especially while watching something or listening to an audiobook. Then we have a question from Jody Howe, who asked, how many languages I speak and how I became fluent in Spanish and other languages, obviously apart from English. So I speak 2 languages mostly fluently, those being English and Spanish. Of course, I am a native English speaker, and I started studying Spanish in the 7th grade, which here in the US is around the age of 12. And I just really loved it. So then I continued taking Spanish classes throughout middle school, high school, throughout university as well. But not only that, I supplemented. Without really realizing that I was supplementing those Spanish classes, I just found it fun and fascinating. I read a lot in Spanish when I could outside of class, and this wasn't anything huge and complicated. It started with in the Ven Conmigo workbooks. That was the textbook that I learned from in middle school. They would have little Calvin and Hobbes cartoons dotted throughout. And we never really touched on them in class, but they were there. And I loved Calvin and Hobbes. I've always loved reading comic strips ever since I was very small. So I loved spending time trying to puzzle out, okay, what words do I know? What is the picture telling me? What words can I figure out? And can I figure out what's going on in this comic strip? Which is a technique that I still try to use in the classroom. And usually it's very effective. And then as I got a little older into my later teenage years, my later years in high school, I started watching programs on the Spanish television channels that we have here in the US, which are Telemundo and Univision. So I would sit up and try to watch Plaza Sésamo on Saturday mornings, which is the Spanish version of Sesame Street, and try and follow along as much as I could and pick out words that I knew. Then I bumped it up a notch and started watching or trying to watch telenovelas. Although I had a problem of, I started watching, I think it was Mundo de Fieras, and just when I started figuring out who was who and how each character was interrelated, just enough to start following the plot, the show ended. It was off the air, could not find it. So then I started in on Pasión, which I really want to re-watch one day because it was everything that I love. Set in the 18th century in the Caribbean on one of the Spanish colony islands. But again, just as I started following the storyline, it went off the air. But all of that time just listening and practicing and trying to pick out as much as I could really, really helped. Sometimes they would show movies that I knew as well, dubbed over in Spanish. So to this day, my mother and I cannot look at the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland without going, Señor Conejo, Señor Conejo, which is how Alice calls to Mr. Rabbit. So little things like that supplemented my classes, and I had amazing teachers as well who had us watching all kinds of movies, listening to all kinds of music, looking at different kinds of art, reading all kinds of different short stories and short little novels. And it all just worked together to make me really love it and really internalize it. That being said, those are the only two languages I am basically fluent in, but I can understand and speak a little bit of lots of other languages. Like, for example, I'm going to refer to my notes because I listed them all here. Yiddish, I'm studying Yiddish on Duolingo at the moment. French, German, Italian, the odd word or phrase in Russian, Mandarin, and Korean. Most of those I know through either study of Spanish with other Romance languages. That helped a great deal. Family heritage and just phrases we always used growing up. The majority of my family heritage is German speaking. So even if I can't understand the words, the pronunciation just makes sense to me. Or through television and music. I was deep into K-pop and K-dramas a few years ago, and I still watch cat videos in Korean. So I've picked up the odd word and phrase there. Then we have a question from Inga, who says, I know you are an opera fan. Do you sing or play any instruments? Do you or have you performed with a choir or an instrumental group? And if you had any formal music lessons, what age were you when you started? So I am very musical. I started with the violin in terms of formal training. I started in school at around the age of 9. It was in the 4th grade, 8 or 9. And then I continued in school orchestras and supplemented by private lessons up until I turned 18. And I was in university, and it just became untenable for me to have lessons, find a practice space, being not a music major. I always sang for fun, and I knew my dad could sing. He was always in choirs. But I started realizing that I was actually kind of good at it myself around the age of 10 or 11. But even there, I just sang around the house. There was never any room in my schedule to put choir into my school schedule. But when I was 14, my dad said to me, hey, why don't you come to church choir with me tonight? Try it out, see what you think. So I agreed. Unfortunately for our choir director, trying it out meant you were in. So there I was. I was in my church choir up until about the age of 22, 23. Obviously leaving to go to university, but I always sang with them when I came home. I sang with a choir in university as well. I sang with the Connecticut Master Chorale for about a year, again with my dad. I then changed churches a few years later, and I joined their church choir. And I sang with them up until the pandemic started. And I haven't been able to go back to church since, because it doesn't make sense for me to go and not be in the choir. It would just feel too strange. So to supplement, I've been taking private voice lessons for the past 2 years. They are online with a friend of a friend who is studying opera. She's studying for her doctorate in opera in Toronto. I've also had failed attempts at learning to play the piano and the guitar, but those are things that I would love to go back to and try again one day if I have the time. The next question actually relates, and it's from Rakadir, who said, related to Inga's question, how did you develop a love of opera? Also, what was it like to study abroad? And the two sort of tie in together, even though they are two separate questions. So I'll start with studying abroad. Studying abroad was amazing. I did 2 semesters abroad, one in the fall of 2011 and one in the spring of 2012. So I basically spent a whole year abroad, and I came home for Christmas in between. So my first semester abroad was in Bath in England, and that has to be by far the best. I took amazing classes with amazing professors from all over, from the University of Birmingham, from Oxford. We took amazing field trips all over the UK. I was able to travel to Ireland when my parents came to visit. I interned at the Jane Austen Centre, and I met the most incredible people. In the program, they paired me up with incredible housemates, some of whom I'm still in touch with to this day. Every time I go to the Jane Austen Centre and Martin Salter is at the door, I get the biggest greeting, and he still remembers me, which is truly incredible given how long it's been. And I joined a local church who were just so kind and so welcoming and pulled me into the church choir immediately when they found out that I could sing. Nothing will top that experience. It was just perfect. So the spring semester was a slight downgrade because it just didn't have that same magic, but it was still great. I went to Sevilla in Spain for the next semester, and I still learned incredible things. I took classes in Spanish history, Spanish literature, in translation, in language education, and I was able to visit incredible places, some of which I will touch on in a later question. The architecture in Sevilla is just gorgeous. The food was incredible. I had the most amazing house mother who was not only an incredible cook, but had formerly owned a restaurant, so it was that extra bit good. I loved Encarna's food. And it proved not only how much more fluent I was than I thought I was, but it also proved that I can survive almost anything. And it was actually through studying abroad in Spain that I started to gain an appreciation for opera. Because living in Sevilla, there were constant references to Carmen. On my walks into downtown, I would pass what is now a university building, but at the time was the cigar factory where Carmen would have worked. And with all of those constant references, I thought, okay, I need to check out a production. Opera had been in and out of my life for the entirety of my life, but I had never really given it a serious try. So I found the production from the Met, I think it was around 2009, 2010, with Elena Garancha and Roberto Alagna, which is still by far my favorite production. And I was amazed. It was powerful, it was deeply human, it was sexy. And honestly, I didn't think opera was allowed to do that. So it completely changed my mind as to what opera could do. But I never pursued it further than that for a few more years, strangely enough. It wasn't until 2018 that I finally went to the Met in New York, because I found cheap family circle tickets for a production of Il Trovatore. And I wanted to see it done properly, unlike one of my favorite films, A Night at the Opera by the Marx Brothers, where they do it hilariously badly. And seeing that production as well, and seeing how rooted and how powerful it could be, really got me hooked. And I started looking for all kinds of productions that I could find online or on DVD, starting to go to the Met more regularly, and I've been hooked ever since. Then we have Maslina, who actually gave me 3 questions. The first was, what would your dream occupation be? That is a dangerous question to give a teacher at the end of a really difficult school year. Honestly, my dream occupation would be book reviewing, but as of right now, I have not found a way that I can do that full time and earn a decent living. Ordinarily, I do enjoy teaching, which is my current job, but lately, as many of you will know, all educational systems, but especially the American one, has been under severe pressure and severe challenges. And my workload has doubled over the past year, so at the moment I'm just getting by. I'm hoping it gets to a point where I love it again. Her next question was, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? And are you more comfortable in rural or urban settings? I could live anywhere, and money and repatriation and all of citizenship and all of that were not an issue. I would have to go to Bath. I would have to go back to Bath. You could probably tell from the way I talked about it in my study abroad segment. It's my second home. I love it. Ordinarily, I do like more rural settings, and Bath is technically a city, but it's so small and it's very low and it's very open and bright, and there are lots of green spaces, and it's relatively quiet, that it's very easy for me to live there. Then her third question was, which is the most meaningful opera theater you visited and has a piece of your heart? And which theater or theaters would make you swoon? So I've actually only ever been to one opera house, which is the Metropolitan Opera in New York. I haven't had the opportunity to go to any other opera houses because, as you'll have heard, I discovered going to the Met around about 2017, 2018, and then the pandemic happened so quickly I haven't gotten a chance to go to any others. I have a bucket list of theaters that I would like to visit in the future. One day I want to do the Glyndebourne Opera Festival at Glyndebourne House in the UK, which is just the most amazing looking theater that is a converted mansion. It's a converted stately home. And so you start out with having drinks in the garden, and then you go in for part one of the opera. And then you have a short meal break, and you have, say, the super salad course of your meal. Then you see a little bit more of the opera, and then you have a long dinner break where you get your main course and your dessert. And then you go back and you finish the opera. That just sounds so luxurious and delightful to me. And they do really amazing productions. I've seen several of theirs that they've filmed. I would love to go to the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden for an opera or a ballet. I would love to go to the Vienna Staatsoper. We walked past it when I went to Vienna, but we never went inside. So I would love to see a production there as well, especially with all of its history of Beethoven and Mozart. I would also love to see the Opera Garnier, not so much for the building itself, but just being such a fan of Phantom of the Opera as a teenager. I would love to see the opera house as it actually is and being used as an opera house. My next question comes from Amanda Cater, who says that she would love to hear a little more about my life as a teacher. I can see you have a heavy workload. Oh, yes, I do. But good camaraderie with your fellow staff, and how I manage to fit reading into that busy schedule. And do I envisage staying in teaching or moving into a different career? Well, I kind of answered that last bit with one of the former questions. So right now I teach middle school Spanish. So that is beginning entry-level Spanish. I am the only Spanish teacher in the building, which means I teach 6 classes a day. 2 classes of 8th grade, 2 classes of 7th grade, then I have a break, 2 classes of 6th grade at the end of the day. However, we also have an A-day, B-day rotation, so that means I have 12 classes to keep track of total. So that means I teach round about 100 8th graders, 100 7th graders, and about 150 6th graders, because their classes are slightly smaller, but we change halfway through the year. So they have a semester of exploratory language Spanish, and then Veronica and I swap, so they also get a semester of exploratory language French. So that is a lot. It's a lot of lesson planning. It's a lot of grading to keep track of. But I do really like my fellow teachers this year. So with that schedule, meaning that I'm waking up at around 5, sometimes not getting home until about 5 o'clock at night, and then having to shower, eat dinner, possibly get some exercise in, general taking care of myself. How do I manage to fit reading in there? I try. My goal is always to read a little bit every night because I try not to bring work home with me. Some days I have to, but I try hard as I can not to. A lot of times, though, that goal doesn't actually happen. I am just so exhausted, I cannot focus my mind enough to read. I am quite a quick reader, however, which means if I have a few uninterrupted hours at the weekend, I might be able to finish a whole book. So that kind of helps balance out the days in the middle of the week when I just can't face it. I also always have an audiobook on the go, which I like to listen to on my lunch break and occasionally during my prep period, depending on what I need to do, which really helps keep my quota up. My next question was from Phoebe, who asked, do I think there are more doors or wheels in the world? She personally thinks wheels. And I have to agree. And here's my logic. Most wheeled things need at least 2 wheels, possibly more, in order to stay balanced. So therefore, there must be double the amount of wheels, at least, than there are doors, because you only need 1 door to get in and out of something. My next question was from David Gibson, who asked, how did I become a Tottenham Hotspur fan, especially as I studied abroad in Bath? Well, first of all, David, I wasn't aware that you couldn't be a Spurs fan if you lived in Bath. I wasn't aware of those rules when I lived there. But also when I lived there, I wasn't particularly interested in football. And on top of that, Bath is not really a football city. It's much more of a rugby city. So it just wasn't on my radar. My discovering the Spurs started with my developing rather a crush on Harry Kane during the 2018 World Cup. And I was following it avidly. It was the first time I was really paying attention to the World Cup. Then in December of 2018, my family went back to Bath to spend Christmas vacation. And while they were sick in bed while we were there, I was searching for anything on television to keep myself distracted, and I found a Spurs match. And they were doing really well, and I noticed, oh, this is who Harry Kane plays for professionally. Okay, cool. And I started to watch how they all played, and I loved how they all worked as a team. There wasn't one diva player that they relied on. And then when we came back to the US, I found out how we could watch Premier League matches here in the US. So we started following them. Each one of us in my family has our favorite Spurs player. Mine is, of course, still Harry Kane. I have to remain true to that crush. But my dad loves Heung-min Son. My mom loved Hugo Lloris and Lucas Moura, although neither of them are playing anymore, and she's really sad. And yeah, we're hooked. We could not cheer for anyone else now. It would just feel weird and wrong. My next question was from Sarah E. Hello, Sarah, who wanted to know what fictional characters I would like to meet in real life if I could. And at first I thought, oh yes, this is such a great question. I know exactly who I would want. And then I stopped to think about it and went, wait, would I actually want to meet these characters? Would it be a don't meet your heroes type situation where I might be disappointed if I actually met these characters because they hadn't lived up to who I imagined them to be from reading about them? Yeah, I'm not sure, but if it weren't that type of situation, and if they were exactly as I imagined them, I would probably like to meet Anne Shirley, because she was my first kindred spirit at around the age of 12, and Elizabeth Bennet, and probably Jackie Faber as well, from the Bloody Jack series by L.A. Meyer. They were such amazing girls for me to have as fictional friends and fictional role models in my teenage years, that they've really made a deep impression on me as an adult. Then we had the monster comment from Not Gettin' Stabby. This is not in a bad way, this is a good way, but there's a lot to this question. They asked, outside of everything Austen related, what are my top 10 all-time favorite books? And not only that, but what are my mom's top 10 favorite books and what are my dad's top 10 favorite books? That is an incredibly difficult question. We all thought really long and hard about our answers. So I'm going to start with their segments, which I filmed earlier today. So I'll show you their top 10s first, then I'll come back and insert mine. Okay, so here then is my dad. So this is Roy, and
hello.
And these are his top 10 books. So what have you chosen?
Well, when you asked me to do my top 10 books, I started making a list, and within a few minutes, I realized that I can't name just 10 top 10 books. What I can name are my top 10 authors, so that's what I'm going to do today.
Okay.
First up is the author Bill Bryson. He has to be one of my favorite authors of all time. I think he's one of the best writers of my generation, I'll put it that way.
Okay.
He has written several excellent books. Well, actually, I love all of his books, but among my favorites are A Walk in the Woods, about hiking the Appalachian Trail, A Short History of Almost Everything, wonderful book. It's a non-fiction book about all sorts of scientific discoveries and scientific oddities. It sounds dry and boring, but it is absolutely not. He absolutely brings it alive with humor and amusing anecdotes and wonderful stories, but you also learn an awful lot by reading this book. I heartily recommend it. And then he has written other, I'll call them travelogue sort of books. I think the first one I read of his that was a travelogue is, this one is called Notes from a Small Island, and it's about walking around the Isle of Britain. I believe it was along the coastline, and all of his adventures in doing so. And then another absolutely wonderful travelogue, one of my favorite books of all time, is Bill Bryson's In a Sunburned Country, all about traveling to Australia. And not just his travels in Australia, but the history of Australia, the history of how it was settled, and the history of the explorers who went into inland Australia to look for hidden lakes and rivers. Of course, they never actually found any.
Whoops.
But the stories are absolutely wonderful, and again, just filled with wonderful humor. So Bill Bryson has to be like my number one author.
Mm-hmm. Which I have to say, this is the only one of, oh no, it's not the only one I've read, but the only one of his classic books that I've read.
Yes, he's also got others that are quite good about the story of the English language.
That one I read.
And he's got a book about William Shakespeare.
That one I have. I think you gave that to me.
Yeah, and while I'm not an English major, I even liked the book on William Shakespeare, and it pointed out, again, it was humorous, but it pointed out how very little we actually know about Shakespeare. So he is definitely the top author on my list. Next, I have the next author would be Peter Mayle, and Peter Mayle has written lots of books, both sort of autobiographical as well as fiction. His most famous book is called A Year in Provence, And there's a whole series of Provence books about how he and his family moved to Provence and just had an absolutely wonderful time settling into the Provence region of France, getting used to life there, and just coming to terms with a whole new way of life.
Mm-hmm. Getting to know all of the people who lived there.
Mm-hmm. He's also written several novels. One novel is called Hotel Pastis, a wonderful novel about, set in, surprise, surprise, Provence, France, where the main character of the book decides to open a hotel in France, and it's one of my go-to books. It's just an absolutely marvelous novel. It makes me feel like I'm on vacation every time I read it. And finally, another example of Peter Mill's work are the Caper series by Peter Mill. What I mean by the Caper series, I believe they're called the Marseille Caper series. There's a series of 6 or 7 caper books, and this one is the Vineyard Caper. I think there's a Marseille Caper, and there are other capers as well. And here again, they're wonderful little, I guess you could call them mysteries, but they're wonderful little novels set in southern France. Absolutely great. I love them.
Okay.
Let's see. Next up, for another favorite author, this is an oldie but goodie. It has to be the James Bond series of books by Ian Fleming. This one is on Her Majesty's Secret Service, one of my favorite books that he wrote. I've read several of the Bond books. I must admit, I've read them many, many, many years ago, but it was these books, and of course, the James Bond films, that captured my attention as a young man, as a young lad, I'll say, in my teenage years. Next up is another author by the name of Martin Walker, and he has written a series of books called the Bruno Mysteries. And Inspector Bruno has various adventures and murders to solve in the Provence, in southern France, in the Dordogne region of France. And here again, while they're enjoyable mysteries, I love I feel like I know the characters, I feel like I know the town that he's writing about, and again, it makes you feel like you've either been on vacation or certainly want to go on vacation to this area.
I'm noticing a theme here with a lot of these.
Next up is another author that you may know from other work. The author is Michael Palin. Now, most of you on the internet probably know of Michael Palin as being part of the Monty Python group, but I think his best work has been in the various BBC television series and the books that go with the television series about his travel exploits. Michael Palin has spent decades literally roaming the earth and the 4 corners of the globe, seeking out various travel adventures. So we have, his first one was Around the World in 80 Days, and
again, the series for this, I haven't read the book, but the television series was so good. We watched it, I was, 10?
Could be.
When we first watched it together, and it's just something we return to every now and again.
Yep, and some of his other travel series are Sahara, where he literally treks across the Sahara Desert. There is Full Circle, where he essentially circumnavigates the entire Pacific Rim and visits every country that encircles the Pacific. And another series is Pole to Pole, where he travels from the North Pole to the South Pole and again traverses all the countries in between those two along a certain meridian. And so they're just fabulous, fabulous travel series. Just to illustrate how the series are so good when we watch the Around the World in 80 Days. One of the best parts of that series was when he was on the dhow, traveling from Saudi Arabia to India. And he was on this very small boat in the middle of the ocean for days upon days upon days with people from India that he did not know. He did not speak their language.
They spoke no English.
Yep. But they graciously agreed to take on Michael Palin and his film crew. And over the course of many days, as they worked together to survive this crossing of the Indian Ocean, they became the best of friends. And that was one of the best parts of that particular series. And it's those sorts of, I guess you could call them revelations or friendships that develop that are they're just what I love about his travel series is it isn't just travel. It's about putting the human perspective on everyone he meets and how we're all just looking for the same sorts of basic friendships and comforts. Next, I have a couple of authors that I don't happen to have examples of the books with me, but I'll explain who they are. First up is the author Daniel Silva. Daniel Silva, I believe, is an American author, but he writes about Gabriel Allon, who is a fictional Israeli intelligence officer, and the Gabriel Allon series is a great series by Daniel Silva, great sort of espionage series. And his first book before that was a book called An Unlikely Spy. It was a World War II spy mystery set in England. That was, again, just a fabulous book, very riveting. So he is one of my favorite authors as well. Another author that I really like are the Inspector Gamache series. This is by Louise Penny. She's a famous, North American writer, and Inspector Gamache works for the police in Canada, and it's essentially if you will, the Three Pines series. And they're a marvelous series of books. Again, I loved virtually everything that Louise Penny has done. They're not only great mysteries, but again, I love how you just get to know the characters and get to know the place. I love being able to sort of picture the town and the places that these authors write about. There's another mystery series by the author M.L. Longworth, and this author has written what is called a Provençal mystery series, and the protagonist is Antoine Verlac, and he is a magistrate in Aix-en-Provence, and here again is, while they are technically a mystery series, I also feel like they're almost a travel or vacation book, because you feel like you're right beside the main character in the town of Aix-en-Provence, just having a good time tagging along and helping to unravel the mystery.
They're also the series the television series, which is on BritBox here. I'm not sure where it's airing in other countries, but the series Death in Provence. These are the books that they're based on, which is not highly publicized, so I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Very good. And then for my final two authors, there are things that are just a little different from what I have presented so far. Next, one of my favorite authors is a man by the name of John Bogle. He's the founder of the Vanguard mutual funds, but he wrote an excellent book here called Bogle on Mutual Funds. And this is basically one of the best finance books, personal finance books, that I think has ever been written. The advice and the insights in here about how to invest and what to do with your personal finances are spot on. The book is about, probably about 20 years old, maybe a little more now. And while you might think, oh, but it's a dated book, no, some of the exact figures might seem out of date, but the advice in the book and what he advises to do with your money and how to handle your money for investing for the future is spot on. And I highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in this sort of subject. And then for my final author, it's not really an author per se, more than, instead of an author, I'll call it a genre or a type of publication. And this would be maps. As Heather can tell you, sometimes there's nothing better for me than just curling up with a really good map, believe it or not. So I just brought along a few examples here of what I think are really good maps. Of course, there's your standard North American road atlas, so that's one type of map. I also love large-scale maps of Europe. This happens to be an A to Z Great Britain road atlas. And then other types of maps that I enjoy are what I would call city maps. So here's an example of a map of central Munich by a company called Streetwise. They're handy little laminated maps that show you all the nooks and crannies in whatever central city you are visiting in Europe. They have these for all sorts of cities. They have them for not only Munich, but they have them for places like Florence and Rome and Paris and what have you. And these are all great maps. I'm sure there are other examples of maps as well, but I just really like paper maps. I know most people now will tend to rely on their GPS for navigation, but for me, there's nothing better than looking at an actual map. And anyway, as Heather can attest to, sometimes I just curl up with a good map and think about future travels and what I could do in that city or in that environment in future travels.
And we tease you a bit for it, but we know you love it, so it's okay.
Yep. Oh, and another map series I don't have yet, but one day I will try to get some of these, are the Ordnance Survey maps from Great Britain. Those are extremely detailed maps that show you not only streets and towns, but they're so close up of a particular area, if you will, that they're great for planning where to take a hike. For example, if you wanted to walk across part of Cornwall, or if you wanted to follow one of the coastal paths in England, or if you wanted to map out, where to find other standing stones like that they have scattered throughout Great Britain, not just Stonehenge. These are the types of maps that can show you how not only how to get there by road, but where you can park, where and most importantly, where are the footpaths? Where can you hike to along the ocean front? Where can you hike between different hamlets. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on some of those in the future. So that sort of concludes my list of top 10 authors. What sort of questions do you have for me?
I don't know that I have any, but because I know that this is your taste and this is your thing. But if you all have any questions for my dad about any of the books that he mentioned, leave them in the comments and I will get back to you with his replies. And here's my mother back again. Hi, Joanne.
Hello, how are you?
And these are her top 10 books.
This was really difficult. This was really difficult.
It's such a hard question.
It is, and this is a miserable copy, but one of my very, very
It's not
favorite
miserable,
books.
it's vintage.
Is that what it is?
Reframe it.
Okay.
It's vintage.
Okay. I'm not ashamed to say I read this book only because one summer, when it was too hot to sleep, I watched the late movie, and there was a movie entitled The Razor's Edge, and it featured Tyrone Power, who was a love of mine at the time, and it was such an amazing movie. I just absolutely loved it. Black and white, didn't matter. It was incredible. And I thought, I really need to read the book, and it has become one of my very favorites.
And that book is?
The Razor's Edge, and by Somerset Maugham. And it's just wonderful. It's very sweet. It's takes place in the America between the wars. Larry Darrell is the main character, and he has survived the First World War, but not without wounds that are invisible to other people, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. He has fallen in love with a young woman who wants different things in life, and he goes off to Paris to find himself. And his search for knowledge, his journey takes him all over Europe, takes him to India, to an ashram. And, when this was written, this was quite exotic back in the day. I mean, our neighbor's daughter went and lived in an ashram, and no one blinked an eye. But back in the 20s and 30s, nobody did that to attain peace and inner harmony. And it's all of the people that he meets, and he keeps meeting the same people at different times in their lives. It's just wonderful. I absolutely love it. It is filled with good humor. It's filled with kindness. It's filled with a great deal of sadness as well, but there's love. And I really like the people in this book. They're people that are part of my life, and I think it's definitely worth a read if you have not already. Now, these two are going to count as one because it's the same author, because I could not choose. I love Woodhouse, and I couldn't decide between A Blandings Castle with Pigs Have Wings or a Bertie Wooster, Code of the Woosters. Now, he's prolific, P.G. Woodhouse, as most of you know. This is my favorite Jeeves and Wooster. There's just something about it. It's the one where his Aunt Dahlia wants him to steal a cow creamer for his Uncle Tom's collection, and hilarity ensues. Very funny. I really, really like it. And this is yet another of, Blandings Castle with Lord Emsworth and his pig, the Empress of Blandings, and whether or not she's going to win the prize for the fattest pig at the next agricultural show. And it's silliness. It's wonderful. I absolutely love them. If you've not tried Woodhouse yet, start with these two. I mean, it's not reading them in order, I realize that, but they're really funny, and I really like them.
And they are series, but I feel like you can jump in at pretty much any point and figure stuff out.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes you just need a classic book, and this is a classic. I mean, I don't even think it's considered a modern classic anymore, The Hobbit by Tolkien. There's something about the language and the way Tolkien writes. Every now and then I need it. I don't know what it is. It's soothing. It's hard for me to put in words why Tolkien, and I came late to Tolkien. As a child, I was told, you have to read The Hobbit. And I tried, and it didn't do anything for me. I don't think I ever finished it, but as an adult, I came to Tolkien, and now I'm a convert. I think he's fabulous, and this, you have to read it. It's wonderful, and there's just something about the rhythm, the cadence, the characters, the language. I find it very soothing. And once or twice a year, I have to pick it up and go through it. So, Tolkien, definitely. And the same for Dickens. Dickens is absolutely the same thing for me. Every now and then I have to have it, and I have a lot of favorites. Bleak House, I think, is my favorite. It used to be Nicholas Nickleby, and I do still love Nicholas Nickleby. But this one, I think because we saw the movie, which I absolutely loved. But there was something about this that, I don't know, it's just, it's...
The writing is incredibly special in this one, I agree.
It is. There's just something, it hits you right here. It's the mystery element, it's the characters that you meet, it's the situations that they encounter. It's just so very well done. I mean, you can't go wrong with, well, I'm still not sure about Martin Chuzzlewit, but most of the time you can't go wrong with Dickens. I love the Pickwick Papers. The Pickwick Papers made me laugh out loud. This is not a laugh out loud book, but absolutely worth your time. It's a doorstop, it's huge, but it's worth it. It's really, really good. Okay, now these next two you really can't tell from the covers because they're very pretty.
Hold up the spines.
Right, this is, which one is that then?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
This is To Kill a Mockingbird. I finally got a decent copy. I had this tattered paperback. You know, an American classic. I think everyone's had to read it in school. But it's one of those books that, you know, you read it when you're a young person and you see things one way. And then you read it as an adult and you see different things. It's a book I think that you can read several times in your life and still gain something from it. I think it's a modern classic. If you have not read it, hie thee to the library and borrow it because it is absolutely worth your time. I love To Kill a Mockingbird. It's wonderful. And this is the same sort of thing. Well, this does have a pretty cover.
Yeah,
so
it does.
That's good. This is one of the first books I can remember buying at the Scholastic Book Fair. I mean, we are going back a long time. My paperback copy, I think, was 75 cents. I stayed up all night to finish it. I think I must have been in middle school. I found it incredibly captivating. The whole idea of Shangri-La fascinated me. I don't know if I feel quite the same way about it anymore, but I do like it. In some respects, this and The Razor's Edge have a number of different things in common. It's the search for self and the exotic places that these characters end up and do find themselves. And that's kind of exciting and it's kind of fun and I really like it. And I think if you've not read Lost Horizon, I did not like they made it into a movie way back when. It was not good. It did not do the book justice. I will say the movie, The Razor's Edge, not quite like the book, but still worth your time. Don't bother with the movie for this one. The old one, the old black and white one, or the modern. Don't even try. The book is where you want to go. This is really good. So those are my classics. Now this I think I've spoken about before. Yes, I have. Part of my unhealthy fascination with the Tudors. I'm not going to say too much about it because I did already. This is in the guise of an autobiography. He's written this book. These are his reminiscences. Completely fiction, of course, but really good. I like it. It's Henry VIII's view of his life, and of course it's a little skewed, because he's always right and he's perfect and he's, kind of sounds like somebody else we could name on the political stage, but we won't go there. Anyway, it's a doorstop, but it's really worth your time. It's very, very well done, and I can't recommend this highly enough. Now this is completely in another direction. I love Fanny Flag, and I think I spoke about Standing in the Rainbow, which I love. This was her second book. I love Fried Queen Tomatoes. It's told in flashbacks. You're in the modern day where she goes to visit her mother-in-law. Evelyn Couch, thank you.
I haven't read it, I'm just naming characters off the flap.
Evelyn Couch goes to the nursing home to visit her mother-in-law. It's a very uncomfortable experience for her. So she gets out of the room as quickly as she can and leaves her husband to visit with his mother. And she meets this sweet little old lady, Ninny Threadgood. And she starts talking to her like she's known her entire life and begins to tell her life story and the life story of the town of Whistlestop and the people who lived there. And it's the journey of the people of Whistlestop. It's Evelyn's journey because at the time when she meets Ninny, she's a very unhappy person. and their friendship. It goes through 2 world wars, it goes through the Depression, it's all sorts of everything, and it's told in flashbacks. And it's not for everybody, because not everybody likes that style of writing, but I liked it. I thought it was really good. Just, you fall in love with these people. You want to know them. You want to go to that cafe and sit there and have fried green tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. There are recipes in the back, too, which I have not tried, but I have to say they look pretty good. So if you've not tried Fanny Flag, this it's a small book. It won't take you long. Okay, this is another one that I stayed up nights reading, only it took a couple of nights because it's kind of big. Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth. I understand they made a movie.
Well, it was a miniseries.
A miniseries, right? Rufus Sewell was in it, and
Eddie Redmayne.
It had a really
Ian
good.
McShane.
I love Ian McShane. I have not seen it, but certainly the cast is good. This book is amazing. It's in the medieval times. It's through the building of a cathedral. It's everybody who's building the cathedral. It's all of the powers at work in order to build the cathedral, to hire the workmen, to get all of the resources, to gain access to the quarry, to gain access to the royal forests for the timber, all of the wheeling and dealing and the politics between, important families and the church, and the grinding poverty that people lived under, and the superstition. It's phenomenal. It is a book that will grab you and hold you. And it's part of a series. I have to say I did not enjoy the ones that followed, but that's just me. Other people I know really, really loved them. This is my favorite. I love the way it began. I love the way it ended. It just tied everything up, I thought, beautifully. The characters were incredibly well drawn. Definitely worth your time. Good summer read, because it will hold on to you for quite some time. I don't know how many people know about this book, because I didn't.
I always get it mixed up with a different book that you have, so please tell us about it.
This is The Physician by Noah Gordon. It's the first part of a trilogy, and again, I didn't like the next 2 books that followed. Again, just me. It's the only reason I ever picked this book up was this book was written by a man who was either my mother had a friend named Lois, and Lois and the author, Noah Gordon, were either cousins or childhood friends. But I remember Lois coming into the office one day, where I also worked in the summer, and saying, Noah's written a book. You're going to like it. Go to the library and check it out, which I did. And it's wonderful. I really love it. Again, a medieval history following Rob Cole, who has a tragic life. His parents die, and in the days, the children are then parceled out to a variety of families, probably never to see one another again. And he is given to a barber surgeon. And they travel the length and breadth of England, and he learns the barber's trade. But decides he needs more than that. He needs to know more than how to be a snake oil salesman, because they do sell something called the Universal Specific, which is, I don't even want to go there. But nonetheless, he decides he needs more than that. And when the barber dies, and he's left with the wagon and everything in it, he decides to make this incredibly bold decision to go to, I think, what is now modern-day Iran and study medicine, something that was denied Christians. But Jews were allowed. So he had to first change everything about him and become a Jew. He had to grow the beard. He had to learn the language. He had to learn the customs. He had to find the clothing. And then he had to convince the man, Avicenna, I think, is the man who is the one that he wants to learn from. He's heard so much about him. The man has knowledge that no one else has, and he wants it. And so along the way, he transforms himself. He meets his wife. He meets a cast of characters. The language, the culture. It's amazing what he goes through in order to achieve his goal. It's astonishing, and it leaves you exhausted. But you admire this person. It's amazing. He wants this knowledge, and he wants it desperately. Years and years of his life, traveling to unknown corners of the world, and then to travel back, and then to be able to be a doctor, to be a physician. Really, really good. I liked it a lot. He's written other things. I have not read any of them, but this book I really, really love. It's terrific.
God, now I have another one that I want to read.
Yeah, it paints such a picture of a time period that when it's presented to you in a classroom setting, it's kind of dry. But when you live it with these people, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And
See, it's funny. I never found it dry, but I think because I had found so much good medieval fiction.
yeah, but I think for a lot of people, the medieval
Yeah,
times
if you
is-
haven't looked at it through that human fiction perspective,
Yeah.
it'd be boring as anything.
Well, that's what historical fiction is all about, is to flesh it all out for you. And you can learn so much from historical fiction. Actually, you can learn a lot from fiction in general. But I am a big proponent of historical fiction.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, I should also mention that all of the books that my husband talked about, some of those are my favorites too, which is probably why we live together.
That's why your marriage has lasted.
It has. I'm sure that's part of the reason. We do like a lot of the same things.
So now, having heard my parents' top 10s, here's mine. I actually had to cheat a little bit and make this a top 11 because there was one that I just had to throw in there last minute. And again, if you asked me next week what my top 10 favorite books were, it might have changed from this stack, but it would be hovering around approximately these 11 books. So this is in no particular order. One of the first books that came to mind was Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. Mom and I were both debating between this one and Bleak House. She ultimately went with Bleak House, as you saw. I had to go with this one. I love the mysteries in both. I think both of them are great. Here, I feel like it's a little bit better because it's so much more human. I love the way he paints these characters, even though a lot of them are absolutely horrible people. He paints them so vividly, and it's real life. No matter how outrageous the circumstances he puts them in, it's real life. And I absolutely adore it. I love the miniseries. I love everything about it. Another one of my absolute top favorites has to be North and South. I feel like it's the perfect combination of Dickens and Austen. It's got that Dickensian social commentary, again, that real life human emotion to it, but with the vivid characters and the subtlety of character that Austen gives you in, say, Pride and Prejudice. And it's just so good and so perfect. Another one I have to go back to is the Poldark series by Winston Graham. I love everything about this series. You get so attached to these characters, and he lets you inside their heads so beautifully, especially as you get into the later books. Even characters you absolutely despise are fascinating when he lets you inside their heads. You don't like them anymore, but you understand why they work the way they do. I debated for a while over my favorite Sarah Waters. It was between this and Tipping the Velvet, although The Paying Guests does run those two a close second, and I had to go with Fingersmith. I still remember exactly where I was when I got to the twist. I did not see it coming, but it was so perfect. She gets that dark, grim Victorian London so perfectly. I would even recommend this over Oliver Twist for a taste of the Victorian underworld. I love it. Another book where I can remember exactly where I was for reading most of it was Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. This is so powerful. And again, I did not see the twist coming, but it was so believable and so deeply human. And I was invested in the story even before that, but I was so much more invested afterwards. And I can't wait to read her new book to see if she captures me again. A Thomas Hardy had to go in there, and much as I love Tess of the D'Urbervilles and as powerful as Jude the Obscure was, I had to go with Far From the Madding Crowd. It's just so beautifully written. Again, the characters are so human. There's so much high drama, but it never feels over the top. And it's just incredible. And this edition is particularly special because I went to see Skylight 2 years after I read this. with Carey Mulligan and Bill Nighy, and I got Carey Mulligan to sign it for me because to me she was the perfect Bathsheba Everdeen. Another totally random book that had to go on here is A Bear Called Paddington by Michael Bond. This whole series has my entire heart, and it has since I was 5 years old. And I think that's a testament to how well it was written, that it can capture children and adults for different reasons and the same reasons. It's just an absolutely perfect series. You excluded Austen-related things, but you did not exclude Shakespeare-related things, so I had to throw in Much Ado About Nothing, which is my favorite Shakespeare play. The gold foil is playing up in this light, but that's okay. I think you can read the title. This was the first Shakespeare play that I saw all the way through, not adapted for children, and it's still my favorite. It was my favorite at the time, and nothing has quite lived up to it ever since. And I have read the entirety of his work now. Beatrice was just an incredible role model to have as a young woman growing up and realizing that you don't need to have the big romantic story. You can be on your own and be independent and be smart and be funny. But despite all that, you can also have a romantic relationship with someone and not lose that part of yourself. For kindred spirits, I had to throw in Anne of Green Gables as well. This one in particular, I liked the rest of the series, but this first one still has my whole heart because it just made so much sense to me when I first read it. Anne and I were kindred spirits at age 12, and nothing will ever change that. I could not go on without mentioning Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is, again, the perfect combination of things that I love. Susanna Clarke manages to use a very Austenian style of writing, which is perfect for the period. It's set in the Regency in England, but with that Neil Gaiman magical whimsy to it, and it's hysterically funny. It is so deeply gripping. The plot unravels just perfectly. The pacing is excellent. And buddy reading this with my friend Jonathan was one of the most incredible experiences I have ever had. I remember texting each other when we found out little details like what Mr. Norrell's first name was, and then getting towards the end and realizing who the chosen one figure was and how is all of this going to come together, and oh, perfect. And the television series they made of this as well, absolutely perfect. And then the 11th one that I had to sneak in there because it was so well done was Homegoing by Yajiasi. At least I think that's how you pronounce her name. Again, I remember exactly where I was where I read it. I feel like the concept of this book was just brilliant, and because of that concept, it's able to highlight so much of history and the parallels in history that I've always found it interesting to investigate, but that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. And yeah, it was just perfect. I loved it. Not Getting Stabby also asked if I've read any Dickens and how I would rank them. Again, this is an approximate ranking. It might change later on. But as of right now, I have ranked them in the following way. So I'm going to be glancing down to look at my list. Oliver Twist would have to go at the bottom. I didn't really care for that as much as I wanted to. Followed by Great Expectations. It was well written, but I hated everyone in it. I have a collection of all of his Christmas works, which I read this past December. I liked A Christmas Carol, but I really didn't like the rest of his stories. I felt like he got incredibly full of himself at times, going, I don't care if your child is dead, cheer up, it's Christmas, which is not how that works. I'm not sure if this counts as a Dickens, but I also read Mugby Junction a year or two ago in Victober, which he has a short story in, and he curated the other short stories. But it's a collection of short stories centered around this railway junction of Mugby Junction. And then he and a bunch of other Victorian authors wrote short stories that went off on one of the railroad lines coming out of Mugby Junction. Really interesting concept. Didn't always love all of the stories. Nicholas Nickleby has to be next. It was good. I enjoyed it. Then A Tale of Two Cities, which I read in high school and I still really love. I love the way it was written. I love, again, the parallels in history that it highlights. Followed by Bleak House, which my mother talked about a little bit more, and I agree with all of her points. And then Little Dorrit at the top of that list, which I just talked about as well. And then my last question came from Megan of Megan the Story Girl, who asked, both in my country, the US, and in others, what are your favorite historical or literary sites that you visited? Again, this is just a list of as many places as I could think to throw down on the paper, but I have been to more places than this as well. And a week from now, I will probably have thought of other places that I could have mentioned. But I loved going through Vienna when I was a teenager. I especially loved the Palace of Schönbrunn. That whole palace was set up so perfectly and it was just incredible. I fell in love with the public image of the Empress Elizabeth, and I'm still fascinated by her, but in a slightly more nuanced way now that I'm that much older. I loved going through the Highlands. We've been through the Highlands of Scotland many times, but when I was 17, we went through the Highlands and we stopped in Culloden. And I loved the way it was set up. It was just so simple and so powerful. Of course, it has the historical significance to Scottish history, but also the literary significance to the Outlander book series, which had not been turned into a television series yet, but still there were so many fans who laid flowers on the Clan Fraser gravestone, and that was just a really beautiful experience. I also not only lived in Bath, as I talked about earlier, but when I was in Bath and taking my Jane Austen class, we went on what I call the Jane Austen pilgrimage, which is that we started in Steventon and saw the field where the parish house used to be, went through the church that she would have grown up in where her father and then her brother were the rectors, then went on to Chawton and toured Jane Austen's house as well as the Great House where her brother Edward lived, and then finished up at Winchester Cathedral where she is buried, and past the house on the street where she lived and died while she was there. I've also been to Stratford-upon-Avon twice now, and loved it every single time. I love the town itself. I love all of the bookshops. I loved going through Shakespeare's House Museum. We went through Anne Hathaway's cottage. I was able to go through the church where he is buried. We saw plays in the theater and in the temporary theater before that when it was under construction. And everything about it was just wonderful. When I was very young and we went through England, we were able to stop in York and do the James Herriot Museum with my mother, which was so wonderful because I had watched the television series and read some of his short stories for children. And she, of course, loved the adult books and had watched the television series as well. And we also went through Nottingham and did the Robin Hood experience, which was quite fun. I loved going through Cardiff, especially from a historical perspective and from a Whovian perspective. There weren't as many literary connections there, although I think the Roald Dahl Museum might be nearby, but when I went, I didn't get a chance to go through it. I've also been to Stonehenge, which was just incredible. When we went through Venice when I was 16, I made it a point that I wanted to go through the Jewish ghetto because I loved The Merchant of Venice and I wanted to see where Shylock and Jessica would have lived. And I loved going through it even now. It's not obviously gated off. Things are far better these days. But it is still very much its own community, which was a lot of fun. And as we walked through, obviously we were speaking English to one another. And these shopkeepers came out and they wanted to welcome us. You are the American Jews! And we had to tell them, well, we are American, but we're not Jewish. We're not the group you're looking for, I'm sorry. And luckily they were right behind us. So we got to hear the singing and the warm welcome of whatever tour group they were expecting, which was just really lovely. When I lived in Spain, of course, I went through Sevilla and the myriad of beautiful historical sites while I was there. And literary, of course, references to Carmen and Don Juan, the Barber of Seville, all sorts of literary references were meeting there. But I loved it more, especially southern Spain overall, because of the Islamic style of architecture, and the Islamic connections are still so strong there. And you can see that especially when I went to Cordoba, which is a few hours away. There's the Mezquita, which was a mosque, and now the inside of it has been converted into a cathedral, which I actually hate the cathedral part. I like the outer edges that still feel much more like a mosque. I feel like that suits it a lot more. And I loved that Cordoba was a city where all three Abrahamic religions, up until the end of the 1400s, lived in harmony, and that's kind of what they've built their reputation on, is that it is the melting of all three religions. And you can go through and distinctly see, oh, this would have been the Jewish section of the city as you're going through. Oh, this would have been the Muslim section. Oh, this would have been the Christian section. It just had a really lovely feel to it. I also took a study trip to Mexico during my senior year with my professor and a few other classmates. And we went to Chichen Itza and Ekbalam and a lot of those very, very ancient Mayan pyramid sites, which the trip overall was just okay, but I'm so glad that I got to see those. Those are just invaluable historic sites. Of course, I live quite close to Boston, so I've been through Boston multiple times, as well as New York City. I went to university in Gettysburg, which was one of the major battles of the American Civil War. I've been to Colonial Williamsburg a couple of times. I went on an American Lit field trip in my junior year of high school, where it was really cool. First, we stopped here in Connecticut at the Mark Twain House in Hartford, then continued on to Emily Dickinson's house, then on to a graveyard where supposedly a lot of famous American authors are buried, like I think Louisa May Alcott is buried in there and a bunch of others. But it was during the worst thunderstorm we have ever seen, so we saw no one that was buried there. We were just miserable and wet and begging our teacher, can we please get back on the bus now? And then we finished up in Salem and spent the next day going through Salem, having read The Scarlet Letter and The Crucible and all of that coming together. So much as I don't typically enjoy American literature, that was quite a fun trip. And I almost forgot, Mary H. asked on my last video with my mother about the Tudors, where were the Henry VIII paper dolls that I mentioned? So I dug them out. I found them. I'm going to show them to you here. So bear in mind, I colored these when I was 7. I had no idea what anybody's hair color was or really what they looked like. And I chose some very bright colors that may or may not be Tudor-like. But let me straighten them out first here. So we start with Catherine of Aragon, which my mother and my grandmother helped with. We ate a lot of cold cereal to get backing for these. And then we had Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. We also had some changes of outfits for some of them. Some of them I think I labeled incorrectly, because some have 2 changes of outfit and some have none. But regardless, we have some changes of clothes for them, some of which are quite helpful, like this one for Catherine of Aragon. You can have older Catherine, but putting this on, you get younger Catherine. And then my Henrys, it comes with 3 Henrys, depending on how old you want him to be. We have the very young Henry, we have middle Henry, and then much older Henry. You can tell how much I cared about Henry, given that 2 of them that this one is only half colored and none of them have cardboard backing. I really didn't care about him, I just wanted the wives. And then this cutout from the back of the book, which also has some really awesome artwork on the back of Eadburga, Evil Queen of the Saxons, from their Infamous Women paper doll series, which is kind of awesome, along with a listing of all of the other sets of paper dolls that Bellerophon Books put out. Let's see, which ones would I find interesting? Well, we have circled a bunch. Ancient China, they also have ancient Africa, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Hawaii, ancient Ireland, and the ancient Near East and ancient Rome. Beethoven. Just Beethoven. That's interesting. Great women, great dancers, great composers 1, 2, and 3, Henry VIII and wives, which these were. Infamous women, Native American chiefs, kings and queens of England, royal family. That would have been interesting. Diana probably would have been in those. Last of the dinosaurs. Why do I have that one circled? I was never a dinosaur person. The Little Mermaid, definitely. Mother Goose, the Nutcracker Ballet, the New Testament, the Old Testament, Pirates, Queen Elizabeth I, the Renaissance, Shakespeare, the Sleeping Beauty Ballet, Southwest Native Americans 1 and 2, Tutankhamun and his friends. It's quite quaint. And women composers, that would have been interesting. But then at the end there's good manners. How do you make good manners paper dolls? But interesting. So there you have the Henry VIII paper dolls that kick-started my fascination with the Tudors. And I have been sitting here for close to an hour. God knows how long this video is. But thank you all for listening. Thank you for submitting your questions, and I hope this has given you some more food for thought or some more insight into me and my life. If you have further questions for me that you didn't get to ask earlier or that relate to anything that I've said, leave them in the comments down below. Who knows, I may turn them into a future Q&A in the future. That was redundant, but that's where we are after an hour of talking. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thank you so much for 3 years of waffling at a camera, and I'm looking forward to many, many more with you all. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.